So I think to start, and you'll probably hate this, I'd like you to give a short elevator pitch for your film. Just a very short description of what your films are about. So maybe Dan, we can start with you and go down the line.
Sure. So for the age disclosure, I interviewed 34 very senior military, government, and intelligence officials who broke their silence to reveal an 80-year cover-up of the existence of non-human intelligent life. And on top of that, they revealed that the elements of the U.S. government and private defense contractors that are involved in this cover-up are also engaged in a high-stakes, secret Cold War race with adversarial nations like China and Russia to reverse engineer technology of non-human origin. And the stakes couldn't be higher. They compare it to the Manhattan Project on steroids.
Petra?
So my film, okay, hi. So my film Apocalypse in the Tropics is the result of 10 years of investigation into Brazilian politics, where I follow President Lula, President Bolsonaro, and his Rasputin figure, who was a pastor called Malafaia. And it discovered this marriage between Christian fundamentalism and Brazilian politics that has been developing very quickly and inspired and ushered with the help of the United States. And that has led, and that ends in our January 8th, which is a repetition of your January 6th. But it's also an essay film on the apocalypse.
Is that working?
You got a,
Oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. The film that I made with my partner and co-director Laura Quatros is called Cover Up, and it is a profile of a reporter, a very famous reporter named Seymour Hersh, who has a roughly 60-year career as a sort of renegade investigative journalist who uncovered in his early years the My Lai massacre, and in his later incarnation the Abu Ghraib situation during the Iraq War, and remains working. And it's a story that is, I think, a kind of a testament to the power of an individual taking on, in this case, sort of the superpower of the American government in most instances. So it's a story of both journalism and a story of a man who is just dedicated to, dare I say, obsessed with unraveling the mysteries that he perceives that are around him and are controlling some of the larger forces in the American government and the international government. So it's a bit of a yarn with a really interesting character at the heart of it.
My film is called The $6 Billion Man, Julian Assange and the Price of Truth. It is about Julian Assange, but I think in this day and age, it is very much about the most fundamental fight at the core of all that we fear in the world right now, which is the fight for the truth itself for the public. And what I didn't know when I began the project with my producing partner, Kathleen Fournier, who's here, we simply came into shattering evidence that had not been brought to light before about the lengths to which the United States and her allies had gone to destroy Julian Assange and to destroy the movement of public information and public illumination that Assange was part of. We hadn't understood, we just saw this evidence, we hadn't before understood the lengths of it, but we had no idea that while we were making it, the world would plummet into fascism and especially into information fascism, making Assange suddenly like a real soothsayer, a real canary in the coal mine. And so it's a story of his saga, but you sort of can't believe at times what he was predicting, when he was predicting it, and how hard, to quote The Clash, the clampdown came.
I guess to start with, how did these projects originate for you? And also maybe how did your perception of the topics change as you kept investigating and talking to people and doing your research? Dan, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So the origin of it is my childhood was the 80s and early 90s, and I grew up on movies like Close Encounters and E.T. and TV shows like X-Files that just piqued my curiosity on this topic, and these big questions like, are we alone in the universe? Does the US government, in fact, know more about this than the public does? And over the years, I've watched every documentary, read every book on this topic. I always wished that a film existed that only interviewed people who have direct knowledge of this topic as a result of working for the government, and a film that set the bar there. And so that movie didn't exist, so I basically set off to make it. And the journey of making that, I'd say, very quickly I realized that there is a there. For me, it was when senior sitting senators started leaning in and making it very clear that at the highest levels of government, this was a very real and serious situation. It was very eye-opening early on, and yeah, that's the backstory.
Since my first film was very much, I would discover later, about trauma, the trauma of losing a sibling. That film was called Elena. And I believe that trauma is something that we tend to want to look away from, and the more we look away, the more it grows. And so my approach has been to try to look into trauma and try to dissolve it by looking into it. And I discovered it was possible to do that with that very personal film, and then went on to do another one about the next trauma or rite of passage in a woman's life, which is pregnancy, to decide or not to have a child. When the earth on which I stood started to crack, which was Brazilian democracy and democracies worldwide in 2016. And I really wanted to understand how that was happening also in an individual level, how a citizenship relationship to his or her own democracy, when it is falling apart, is also maybe one of the most traumatic things one can go through, because there's the idea of what are your securities in the present start to dissolve, what your future and the future of your children will be. So it's very destabilizing, and I was interested in understanding that, and also why was that happening. And that was my first film of this kind of diptych, which is The Edge of Democracy. And when I was filming The Edge of Democracy, trying to understand the crisis of Brazilian democracy, one of the first scenes is when I enter Congress, and instead of finding congressmen debating the issues at hand, which was impeachment of our first female president, I was met by a pastor who, when I asked what will happen to Brazilian democracy, he said, God will decide, and handed me a Bible and asked me and my entire crew to accept Jesus, which I did. And that moment was really a rabbit hole that I would only enter 4 years later when I ended that film, and I was like, I'm never gonna do another film on Brazilian politics. And then the pandemic began, and I couldn't help but document the worst moment in our history. And when the material started coming, it was clear that evangelicalism was everywhere. And so I went back to that first scene and started this investigation.
Well, my journey in making this film sort of started many years ago when I was introduced to Seymour Hersh, and we became friends. It started with a film that was proposed to me by the executive producer of the series Frontline. He said, go and meet this wonderful reporter who, this is 1985, who was very hot and getting a lot of, doing a lot of really interesting reporting, and I went and met him. And we decided, well, we'll just go out and, or I would go out and follow him reporting a story. And it was one of the most interesting experiences I've had in filmmaking, because I basically was just chasing this man who, if you see the film, you'll realize has enormous energy and obsessive qualities, just the kind of thing you'd want in a film character. And so I raced around the country with him, and we unraveled the story and actually confronted a bad guy who was a Pakistani who was trying to export illegal nuclear triggers to the Pakistani nuclear program. And I was just hooked. So I want to work with Cy, and we subsequently made two other films, and remained friends. So I had a kind of baseline starting this both friendship and also a pretty intimate understanding of who this person was and what an interesting character and what a committed character he is. He's somebody who really is, trying to speak truth to power, to use that old saw, but that's actually, I think, what he does. And so I've always known that there was a film there, and unbeknownst to me, Laura Quattrus, who probably you all know, was also very interested in making a film with him, and at some point, 5 years ago roughly, or 4 years ago, we decided to sort of join forces, see if we could raise the money, which we did, and make a film that chronicles his career, which also includes his present day reporting, which is by no means as dramatic as the stuff that I did way back when. But it is a through line through the whole thing, and I just think that the film is basically something that I think both Laura and I wanted to do because we felt he was a very significant character. And the thing that I would say about the process over time is that when we started, which is roughly 3 years ago, it was a completely different landscape, as you all know. And I think this film, which is about a reporter who really is unbound and is willing to take on anything and anyone, the process that he uses exists because of the First Amendment. And I think that the threats to the First Amendment, and thereby threats to characters and reporters like Seymour, is just far different now than it was when we started. So the film kind of grew into this moment, and I think it's something that people have really appreciated about the film, which is, you might say, accidental.
I think in full disclosure, I had a previous chapter of my life where I was in connection with Julian Assange because he had once called me for some guidance he needed about drug policy, because I made a film about the war on drugs in America, and he was about to do some sort of public seminar and needed sort of state-of-the-art understanding of the arguments to be made on the topic. And so we got to know one another, and I found the WikiLeaks movement at that time very refreshing and very important. I would say it was technologically beyond me. I didn't understand at the time that what they had invented was a Dropbox, an anonymous technique, so that people could upload things to the public without anybody having a fingerprint on them, so that you didn't have to do what had to happen in the Seymour Hersh days of meeting a whistleblower in a dark parking lot. There was no longer that, and that was a huge threat to the power structure in the digital age. I didn't understand that. I just knew something was afoot and that he was somehow at the center of it, and I got to know him, and I did a few things with him. And the most remarkable thing we did at that early time, this is long before the movie, was that we decided to break him out of the Ecuadorian embassy where he was a political asylee, pixel by pixel, breaking him out as a hologram. So I did an interview of him as a hologram at a kind of TED Talk in Nantucket that we did. And that had been a great experience, but to be blunt, after it, I sort of feel like I drifted from him. And if I look back, I would have to say that what I now know to be a massive international propaganda campaign designed and run by the United States out of a Pentagon operation. There was literally a Pentagon task force assigned to besmirch and destroy Assange and his organization from every angle possible. I think it had an effect on me. I never said to a friend or something, I don't like that Julian Assange guy anymore, but I drifted from him and I stopped being active. And then in 2020, I stumbled into an art gallery in Berlin, Germany, where I suddenly was surrounded by walls covered with some of the people I admire most in the world, from Cornel West to Ken Loach to Alice Walker to Ai Weiwei and all these people, and they were staring down at me. Even Pamela Anderson was staring down at me. Isn't she great now?
Yes.
Cheers for Pamela. And she was staring down at me, holding a sign in solidarity with Julian Assange. And there were hundreds of them. In fact, it's a campaign called We Are Millions. And I suddenly realized I wasn't one of the millions. And I felt profoundly guilty. and that maybe I drunk some Kool-Aid. So I went up to one of his staffers who vaguely remembered me as the hologram guy, and we talked, and he said, well, there's some evidence you should see about the case. It might interest you. Come to London. And they put me and Kathleen into a hermetic chamber, and we were shown staggering material that I didn't know was imaginable about what a government would try to do to a person to stop us from knowing. And that was, I think, the step that I was here in a guilt-driven reversal. And then the tiny coda is that a couple of years later, when I went to Moscow to interview Edward Snowden for the film, because Snowden is a major ally of Assange, because as very few people know, Assange rescued Snowden. WikiLeaks was the organization that got Snowden to safety. It's kind of like Batman saving Superman, and interviewing Snowden about Assange was like interviewing Batman about Superman. It was quite fun and interesting. But the thing about that was that when Snowden said goodbye at the end of the interview, I watched him disappear. He was at that time a stateless person. He still had not even been granted Russian citizenship. And I watched him disappear into the Russian night. And I thought, there's the picture of any one of us who decides to stand up to a system that is robbing us all from our very right to know what's happening to us. And I have been living with the effort to make good on that promise we made to Julian and to the public condition, the public right to know. That's where we are.
To that end, Eugene, was Julian eager to participate in this documentary? I mean, I know his participation is a little different than other.
Well, he was in jail the whole time we were making the film until he was suddenly out. And then we had a real shit sandwich because we built the film to try to get him out. And all of a sudden he's out. Okay, re-edit. But to the great benefit of all, it was a wonderful stroke because it's a real saga with an ending and a real Hollywood ending somehow. Because he beat the American government. That's the most important thing here. In a Mamdani moment like we're having right now, he beat the U.S. government at the chicanery they were involved in to stop us from knowing. And Julian, from the start, I think probably I asked him when we were at the Cannes Film Festival, because I was suddenly standing next to this scofflaw on the red carpet at Cannes. And we hadn't even won anything there yet. We were just in the first moments. And I felt so proud that there we were, and there he was, and that the right to know was walking the red carpet itself. And I sort of at that moment, I said to him, did you ever wonder when you were in jail, like, was I ever gonna finish? Because we went on for a long time, and I think he thought we could rescue him, but there was never an inflection point. He was stuck there, and it was impermeable. I think the film had an effect on him getting out in many other ways, because it was known that it was happening and it reached U.S. authorities, and there was some interplay between what we were doing and the legal case itself. But I think Assange grew worried. He confessed that we would just never finish and it would never be helpful to him. And I think now he sees it as something that really tells the full story in a way that was never available for even my colleagues who made films about him when there just wasn't the information available that now is.
And Mark, I know that you were saying that you were friends with Seymour Hersh, you've worked with Seymour Hersh. In watching the film, he seems a little prickly with you at times and moments.
Why do you say that?
Well, he basically tells you to go through a couple times. But was it hard to kind of, despite the fact that you had this, relationship and presumably a reservoir of trust to draw on?
No, I mean, honestly, in the film, he does, seen it, he quits at one point, but he comes back. And I was used to that kind of behavior, I would say. I mean, it was not unfamiliar to me, and I think that I never could really doubt that he was committed to the film and was going to stick with it. I do know, though, prickly is a very appropriate word, and Sai is very prickly. And one of the things that I'm actually proud of in the film is that comes through. And in no way does it whitewash or somehow brush over his foibles. He has many, and I'm very fond of saying that people in Washington, where he's spent most of his career, if I go up to somebody, another reporter or somebody who, most of them, if I say, well, I'm working with Seymour Hersh, they smile. Because they kind of like, he's a character, he's cranky and he's this and he's that, but he's also endearing. And I think that comes through in the film. So I feel we kind of nailed him in a way, but at no point did I ever feel like he was abandon us or anything like that. My God, we committed so many hours to film. If he had walked out, I would have killed him.
I mean, you were talking, Eugene, about truth, about the way that institutions try to disguise it, to prevent us from accessing it. And it seems like both of your films deal with difficult people. I mean, they are flawed people in very different ways, but it almost seems like...
flawed. Wait a minute, I don't want to be quoted. Difficult?
Difficult. I mean, it seems though like you need people like that to take the risks that you're talking about.
Well, sorry about that. It's a bit of a gift. I mean, if you look at the characters we most love when we think about dramatic movies or television, like Archie Bunker or, Ralph Cramden, or people are just terrible. The House of Cards. People are just, we like unlikable people in whom we find endearing qualities, people who are just all good and it's a bit saccharine, you don't get that much out of them. And frankly, I think there's a certain kind of person, from Seymour Hersh to Assange to Bolsonaro to whatever, there's a certain kind of person that you might love to hate. You might find them. I mean, Bolsonaro's so toxic. So now let me cut him out of there. Let's go to Lula. It's rare to find the pure villain, but if you find these textured people that are on the line, that's where we all are a variation of that also. We all have, John Lennon had that beautiful line, we've all got Jesus in us and we've all got Hitler in us. The point is to work on the good bit of you. And I think that capacity to work on the good bit of you comes out when you're dealing with someone who's imperfect. Julian is profoundly imperfect, and yet it's not difficult for me to say that in practice, in what he did with the last 15 years of his life and would have been willing to do for decades, he is the equivalent of a saint. That's what a saint does. A saint puts their body into the fire for the purposes of the collective. And whether you like him or not begs, would you have liked Jesus or not? Would you have liked anyone willing to do that? It's not the saccharine that we fall for. We like, because frankly, most people who go up against systems of power, there's a measure of arrogance in it, there's a measure of self-centeredness in it. They're usually not that good with their loved ones, they're usually like a bull in a china shop in other ways. When you go to Cuba, that's what you hear about Castro, is that, Cubans will tell you chapter and verse how terrible Castro was, but it's also what made them the envy of the world. Colonized people the world over watched a colonized person overtake a superpower. You don't do that if you're an angel. So it's that line that I think is in all these stories. I mean, I do think Bolsonaro is just uniquely toxic, but because you're doing Bolsonaro and Lula, you have the mix. There's a good mix there.
Petra, your film, I mean, you're a Brazilian filmmaker, you're writing about, history as it's happening, very controversial topics. What kind of resistance did you face, and how did you finance this too?
Well, when The Edge of Democracy came out on Netflix, at first it was just love, because the film was basically, the entire Brazilian media landscape was portraying what had been happening in the past 4 years, which was a parliamentary coup and an imprisonment of Lula that was very questionable. And most people on the progressive side felt there was something wrong, and a dissociation with what they were feeling, with what was coming out in the press. So when the film came out, it was like a cry or a scream that everyone had stuck in their throat. So it was unbelievable. It was like 1 tweet per minute. Millions of people watched the film. I was being recognized in the street. It was very interesting for the documentary. Then when it was nominated, the far right started to attack me a lot. Bolsonaro gave a public speech saying that the film was like crap that vultures should eat. Then he used his official Twitter to attack me, calling me a traitor of the Brazilian state. And I became trending topics on Twitter, like Petra Costa, liar. The day of that I was supposed to choose what I was going to dress at the ceremony, so it was very disconcerting. And that lasted a few months, where I was constantly being attacked by his digital militias, and one of his congressmen, who's also an evangelical congressman, asked for my imprisonment by the law of national security. Then I really went undercover for 4 years while making this other film, was very discreet. And Malafaia, thankfully, this evangelical pastor who became the closest ally and mentor of Bolsonaro, we constructed a path to have access to him. We worked with a journalist that had been working with him, had a relationship, a long-standing relationship with him. And she introduced us to him, and he was willing to make the film. And since the film came out, 1 month after exactly, Bolsonaro was condemned, right, to 27 years in prison, so there is a happy ending to our story. He is the first president in Brazilian history to be condemned, and also many generals. For the first time, the military was condemned for plotting a coup, even though Brazil had 6 coups only in this century. And never were the military ever punished. So this was like civilizational threshold. And 1 month after the film came out, Malafaia, this pastor who was really coordinating much of the actions, had been ignored by the press and the police for his role, was finally added to the investigation. And might also be facing further complications.
And Dan, when it came to your film, I mean, first of all, it's amazing how many people you have on the record. They're at all levels of government, and it's bipartisan. It's, Marco Rubio, Kirsten Gillibrand, Clapper, a whole bunch of people. Were you surprised by their willingness to talk to you? Because I would imagine this is a topic that they might fear could make them a subject of ridicule, potentially.
Yeah, similar to Eugene's experience, making this movie made me realize how much information is kept from the public. When I first started getting an audience with sitting senators, intelligence officials, generals, admirals, I realized pretty quickly that those that had actual direct knowledge of the topic found themselves essentially with a dilemma where a huge chunk of that information was classified. They could never talk about it without going to jail. The other chunk that they could lawfully talk about, they weren't comfortable talking about because they've been threatened, they've been told, hey, yes, you can legally talk about this, but if you do, your career will be damaged, your reputation will be ruined, you'll be threatened, physically. They also didn't have a forum to do it. None of these guys wanted to go out and do an interview on CNN or Fox or go in a big, studios documentary and worry about it being sensationalized. No one wanted to be out on a limb. They didn't want their reputation attacked. And so when I started realizing that was the lay of the land, I started presenting them as basically a unique solution to the problem. I said I would make this film independently. I would not do it at a big studio or streamer. Would keep creative control over it. I would only interview people who have direct knowledge. I would socialize the names with them so they knew who they would be arm in arm with. They wouldn't be intercut with some knucklehead who brought them down. And promised them we'd treat this very seriously and soberly, and spend many months making it clear to each one of them that I had put the time in to learn the lay of the land and realize how serious this is. So eventually, the film about what can lawfully be disclosed by those with direct knowledge became the vehicle for those people to disclose what they could lawfully. And then people started piling on. Like, I would get calls from senior members of the Senate Intelligence Committee staff or the Senate Armed Services hearing my Senate Armed Services Committee staff or Senate Intelligence staff, they would call and say, hey, we had a closed door session with this intelligence official. They gave us a classified briefing of what they can only share with us. There is some stuff they can lawfully disclose that they've never talked about. We're going to send them your way. So people started just getting on this plan of this being the way real information would come out and be shared with the public. Mm-hmm. Every one of the people I met felt a weight on their shoulders with regard to what they knew that the public did. A lot of people articulated to me how it eats them up that they're aware of this information that impacts all of us, and the average person is completely clueless. So they felt it was an obligation to find a way to bring it out in a safe, comfortable way. And they also comforted being arm in arm with senior officials from the military, government, and intelligence community.
Was there one interview that kind of unlocked all the other interviews? Was there one get that made it?
I think when Rubio got on board, that was a real turning point. At the time, he was the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. All the intelligence agencies report to the Senate Intelligence Committee every week. He was extremely well aware of the entire lay of the land at a classified level and at a non-classified level. When he got on board and made it clear to his colleagues on both sides of the aisle that this was going to be the vehicle in which he brought out what he lawfully could, other people started getting on board. That's when General Jim Clapper came on board. Clapper's in his 80s, never spoke about this topic ever. He was the director of national intelligence. He was the head of Air Force intelligence.
And did they not speak about it because they were worried about confidentiality kind of issues, or because there wasn't inquiries?
Well, certainly inquiries, but the three biggest reasons are A, gatekeepers of these secrets literally threaten people to keep their mouth shut. Like, simple as that. There's just outright, your career will be ruined, your reputation will be ruined, your life will be in danger. These are the kind of threats people have historically gotten for years. And on top of that, there's this cultural stigma, in our country at least, that it's not logical at all, and it's totally antiquated, but there's this like giggle factor in our culture. If you bring up UFOs or non-human intelligent life, or a word like aliens, people often just giggle and don't take it serious. So if you're an incredibly high-level, serious guy, like a general, you're going to avoid situations that would make you look silly or that could be used against you. So there's all these reasons that have been stacked against us, the public, from finding out the truth. And the 34 people I interviewed decided to take that personal risk and disclose what they lawfully could.
I mean, all four of you are dealing with topics that are very, potentially pretty incendiary, that it's not necessarily in the interest of very powerful people to have this information out there, to varying degrees, but how complicated is your job right now in this environment, globally, in our own country? I don't know, Eugene, do you want to start?
I mean, I think the situation is now so, I think we can't lie to ourselves that we're living certainly in the American condition, but it's becoming more global too. At a time where I'm not sure we're in the age of democracy anymore. I was just looking up the age of disclosure, and I was thinking of the edge of democracy, and these terms, these titles that are contending with something far more seismic, far more tectonic about where we are as a species, even, as if to imagine that there had been a time where the world was kind of run in the laws of the wild, where the powerful just held sway over the less powerful, the same way a lion just consumes a warthog as it wishes or as nature demands, and that there had been this evolution with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance and with the growth of humanism, where we started to understand a balancing act in the human condition, and that had led in one way or another to sort of democratic movements. Whether you think of those as the ones that led to communism or whether they led to this capitalism, which is this broken version, it's this broken abuse of democracy, where it's really an economic system pretending that people chose it. It's the illusion of choice. It's abject bullshit, no more nor less than the communism was an abject, absolute manipulation of Marxism, which I think was rather smart and correct, but then you look at communism with the hell in a handbasket. So we're in the wake of all that. But I think the age of sort of absolutely depraved turbo capitalism is upon us. I keep minding when Bernie is out there saying oligarchy, because I don't think most people know what that word means at all. It means there's a tiny group of people in the world ruining all life on earth for everyone else for a short-term profit that they can never spend in 1,000 lifetimes. It's mathematically insane. And the Mangione event was the reason that guy became a hero is because this doesn't make any fucking sense as a way of living. And I'm making movies in that new environment where there's a tectonic. The reason I was in an Italian barber shop as you can see, unfortunately, a couple of days ago, I was in an Italian, maybe they should have been focused on my hair because they were chatting in the Italian barber shop about Mamdani. I kept trying to read the Italian, they kept saying this funny word they were mangling, and I couldn't figure out what word it was. In Italian, it was Mamdani. So when Mamdani's victory and that sort of pushback against Trump that we've seen in recent weeks, I think that's very seismic, but it's an evidence of a tectonic battle going on. But at the moment, we are making films in an environment where a tiny handful of corporations who are part of that elite disaster, a tiny handful of those corporations, and the very good people within them who work for them, who are trapped in that matrix, are programming such things for the most part as keep the empire going. And for anyone who wants to do something that really blows against that wind, it's a rare thing to get in. And in this day and age, that not only means you have to make it as if you're a guerrilla warrior in the rebel army against the Death Star, but you probably have to release it. And I will have to with the Julian film, because it will not be picked up by any mainstream organization. So we will go direct to the public with it, like finding that little hole in the Death Star.
Hard to follow that. I think that what.
I haven't taken my meds today.
Oh, okay. Well, I need an offer, I guess. I don't know. But I think that you're talking about the macro, and I think this film Cover Up is more the micro. In that the micro is the condition here in the political system here in the United States, where a reporter who has, I think is sort of emblematic of how the First Amendment works and serves the people, is in fact directly under threat by an administration that's in my view, just kind of unspeakable in the way in which it thinks that we should get information. And so I think that I think that the film that we made has a hero, if you will. Films do have heroes, and a hero who is really trying to focus our attention on what we're losing, and we're losing the protections that sources have to give information to a reporter like Cy Hirsch, and it's I think a very, very, very dire situation. I think that if Cy were here, he's fond of sitting there and just interrupting and saying, "Wait a minute, let me tell you what's really going on." And what's in his view, what's really going on is that reporters are being intimidated, sources are being intimidated, and the means to investigate the government is being diminished every single day, more and more and more. So I think that's the landscape, the micro landscape that our film focuses on.
Well, and also the corporations that pay for a lot of that journalism are not exactly profiles of courage.
Yeah, that's a whole other sort of subject matter that, what has happened to the institutions of journalism. I mean, here's Cy Hirsch as a reporter who has both prospered inside the establishment. He's a legendary reporter at the New York Times and the New Yorker, where he did volumes of work, but it's also as an independent outside of those organizations. So he's emblematic of the potential of both subsystems, but he's particularly troubled, as am I, and I'm sure all of you, by the diminishment of the sources of information, be it the Times, the Post, but this country is full of great newspapers that don't exist anymore, great sources of fact, if you will, that are are either out of business or compromised in some way by overlords.
So for those who have seen my film, I don't know if you have noticed, but the opening credits has the music, which is the music Brazil, Aquarela do Brasil, but the version that is in Terry Gilliam's Brazil. And I had the chance of meeting Terry Gilliam just after I finished The Edge of Democracy, and I asked him why he called Brazil, Brazil. And he was like, well, when I made it in the 80s, there were all these dictatorships in Latin America, and that was my vision of this dystopian future, that our own countries, the United Kingdom, the United States, could become also authoritarian countries. And that really summarized so much for me of so many things that I was trying to understand. Well, first, being from a country that suffered 21 years of authoritarianism because of the help of the United States, it is interesting to see now the United States tasting its own poison that it spread through so many countries around the world. It's horrible as well. I mean, but I think we have to have this in our minds as well. Oh my God, I never imagined we would live this in our lifetime. But actually, you were spreading this, not you, but your government was spreading this throughout the world, and many people were living. I mean, my mother's symbolic father was assassinated as part of this, which I would tell in Edge of Democracy. So there was a lot of mass murders going on in the 20th century. And now, and what is democracy, right? As you were saying, Eugene, democracy was invented in ancient Greece precisely to try to ensure that people that were being imprisoned, enslaved, raped, would not be imprisoned, enslaved, and raped out of just the whims of the richest, of the oligarchy. And even though there were slaves in ancient Greece, but still it was an attempt to give people human rights. And we're seeing a return to the destruction of democracy precisely because there are people who are becoming trillionaires and no longer want a government that will tax them. And that was the reason democracy was toppled in Greece the first time, was also because the Greek oligarchs did not want to pay taxes. So it's always about the taxes. and what I discovered, and of course I already imagined this, but not to the extent that it is, that these evangelical Christian nationalists, such as Malafaia in Brazil, Fowles here, etc., also their main concern is paying taxes. And they partner with far-right governments, so they won't pay taxes. And what was fascinating was to discover also the apocalyptic side to this, which is these far-right Christian nationalists want to usher the apocalypse because they believe, or they pretend they believe, that the faster the world ends, the faster Christ will come back. So you have right now people in positions very close to the government here, wanting to usher the end of the world for Christ to come back, and others that want to usher the end of the world, like Musk and Bannon, etc., because they know they will be protected inside their bunkers. So if we are the part of the people who believe in the survival of the planet, that should be a bigger congregation than left or right. It should unite us all who believe that we can preserve the planet to live in rather than destroy it.
Dan, with the last word?
Well, I think
this is that people in your profession are facing right now, kind of given the current political climate, to doing your work.
I think what comes to mind for me with this film, the topic that I covered has been largely ignored by legacy media. And I don't think it's because they don't feel there's an appetite for it. I think it's because the intelligence community in our country has a very strong hidden hand with legacy media and can discourage them from covering topics very easily. There's a lot of horse trading that goes on, and there are many ways intelligence officials can make it worth, a news platform's worth it for a news platform to ignore a topic like this. So I was told early on by a number of the intelligence officials that I got on board my film that they really believed the only way the truth on this would come out in a digestible way to the public was through an independent film like this. They just didn't think it was in the cards with legacy media. There's way too many compromised people, and it's both TV news and print news. Some of the people are so blatant about it, if you start tracking certain reporters, every time something happens for disclosure on this topic, 2 days later they write an article throwing water on it saying it's all bullshit and it's not real. So I was told early on that I should both expect pushback from people who wish this movie didn't exist, and also not to expect support from mainstream media. However, what's happening right now is, as the trailer's been catching wind, and I'm proud to say both trailers have over 20 million views, and that's led certain newsmen and major platforms to stick their head up and say, okay, we'll get behind it. So I think things are going to start to change. I do think, like all your films, I think that we're entering an era where civilian journalism is going to be more important than ever. Because I don't think it's going to change on the legacy media front on a big level.
Well, will you join me in thanking our fantastic panelists and staying seated for our next panel?